Is vulnerability powerful, or is it just a power struggle? This video today is going to be for anyone who struggles with the idea of getting close to someone. And by getting close, I mean sharing thoughts, feelings, desires, owning up to your mistakes, owning up to your insecurities, admitting to things like weaknesses that you may have or embarrassments. But they're also the kinds of things that can either drive someone away or bring them closer to you. I have to admit that when it comes to getting close to someone, I sometimes feel a little weird, especially as a man either dating another man or having friendship with another man. It doesn't even have to be a gay relationship per se. It could just be a colleague. And it doesn't always have to be with another man. It can sometimes be with a female friend. However, that feeling of getting close often triggers for me a sense of needing to protect myself. Is it a power struggle, or is it something that could actually drive a very powerful and meaningful relationship with someone that you want to be close with? Honestly, no one really likes the idea of vulnerability. It often triggers feelings that are related to need or dependence. But vulnerability is also a powerful tool for building any kind of relationship, whether it's friendships, work relationships, romantic relationships, even family relationships. When it comes to vulnerability, I would say there are three main power struggles. There's a struggle between the fear of vulnerability versus a need for emotional intimacy. There's also a desire for stability versus the fear of monotony. And the third struggle, I would say, is a conflict avoidance versus honest communication. Now let's dive into each of these separately. The fear of vulnerability versus a need for emotional intimacy. We're talking about the struggle with the fear of being emotionally exposed, while also recognizing that there's a need for deep emotional intimacy in a relationship. In many relationships, baggage from the past tends to interfere with the present. This happens to me all the time, and I see this as the linchpin to whether a relationship will succeed or fail based on this alone. And these fears are related to exposing your inner needs and desires, as well as even quirks, weaknesses, shortcomings, things that could be rooted in ideas of being abandoned, betrayed, or outright rejected. And it becomes like this tightrope walk. For me, the beginning stages of any kind of relationship are filled with this kind of awareness. But for me and for many of us, emotional intimacy is a real need. It's a craving, it's a desire, it's a fundamental human need that we all have to be close to someone. You can't like walk around and be close to these stoic beings who are clinical. They're very, I don't know how to say it. When I say clinical, I mean they have nothing, an exterior that is just like hygienic. It's just, there's no texture to it. There's no messiness involved with it. And when you are having that going on, you actually want to be known. You want to be seen. You want to be valued. You want to be desired versus being someone who is not known, who is invisible, or who is spurned. And this is a real dilemma sometimes where you have something in you that you want to let the other person know, whether it's a friend, whether it's a colleague, and a lot of times when it's in a romantic situation where there's something that's really important to you and maybe that partner or that boyfriend or that person of interest is not really seeing it or knows about it. And it's something that you really want them to know. And you're like, is being my true self, is revealing that worth that risk? Or am I going to just fulfill some kind of fake sense of intimacy, and is that really worth the price? Those are the quandaries that you have to decide between whether you're going to be vulnerable or not. I was in a relationship with someone where this was the case, where I totally wanted to let him know who I was, or let him know about some aspect of my past, or some kind of quirk that I had, or some story about me that would add a bit of meaning to our relationship. And try as I as I could. It was just so hard to get it out, the words out of my mouth. I was just so scared. And in that situation, I stuffed it down. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to further that along because I was really afraid. I was afraid of being exposed, and I thought that he would reject me. And when there is an element of scarcity in the community or dating pools, it becomes it is like a very hard decision to make to whether you're going to reveal your cards or you're just going to keep going on with emotion. But I can tell you that sacrificing emotional intimacy for keeping yourself safe in the long run, it just hurts. It is something that will kill you on the inside. It just will make you feel very sad. And you'll just be walking around and not really engaged in the relationship. Now let's talk about this desire for stability in a relationship versus a fear of monotony. This is another strong area where it is such a compromise to be close to somebody. Where if you're someone who favors a stable, committed relationship, but you're also afraid of getting bored due to lack of variety, excitement, or passion. Now, this can happen. Say you're dating someone and you do the same thing week after week after week after week, that it just kind of follows like a program. It follows like a rhythm. It's very predictable, it's very stable, very reliable, but there's not a lot of variance in it. And as creatures, we are like we need differentiation. We need, I guess, an element of drama or an element of conflict. It doesn't have to be blown out, but there's something that you need to really kind of further that relationship along, to make it exciting, to make it passionate. But you're really afraid to tip that apple cart over because you want to keep things safe. You want to hold on to it and you don't want to let it go. So keeping the status quo by not being genuinely open out of fear of rocking the boat is a real struggle for a lot of guys. And I see this tanking relationships. Either they go into this remote, automatic, robotic state where there is no fun and it becomes very predictable, and then one or the other partners is needing to introduce some kind of element of excitement. And unfortunately, sometimes what happens is it creates conflict, which actually creates that texture, but it's not always the desired result that you want. And you really do need to have texture in a relationship because being too predictable doesn't allow for the messiness that's required to make a relationship interesting and reliable and workable. Because when things go according to plan, it's just, I don't know, it's just watching the same predictable movie and it doesn't change at all and there's no excitement. It seems that variety and monotony could definitely be at odds with one another, but we actually do need variety and novelty. Otherwise, life becomes really dull. And in this case, relationships become dull and they just kind of peter out. So you'll find yourself wondering if it's really worth the risk to ask for something more. Can we do a different kind of date? Can we talk about things that could make us feel vulnerable? And these are real risks. However, if you don't do it, it's still risky because you just risk the relationship just petering out, just fizzling out, not really making it through, dumping the guy, going with somebody else. And these are why a lot of times people struggle with connection, and it also feeds into a lot of loneliness. So taking time to be honest and forthright takes courage and vulnerability. If you're someone who has gone with the flow and suppressed your real feelings and real needs in the relationship for the sake of keeping things the status quo, it eventually becomes just rote, tedious, and boring. And you go through the motions and the feelings go out the door and all these robotic movements take their place. And what happens, unfortunately, when you keep stuffing and suppressing, there's this sense of resentment that kind of takes root where you're deliberating on it and you're like, why can't I do this? And why won't he ask me this? And why can't we do something differently? And that's all going on in the inside. But on the outside, it's like a visible, hey, things are really great. Hey, let's do this. And that just doesn't really further the relationship. Vulnerability in the sense, it's a power struggle, but also if you flip it, it becomes a very empowering thing to do. So what happens after you do this for a long time, where you have those stuffed down feelings, those suppressed desires you're not letting out? Conflict. Conflict avoidance versus honest communication is another power struggle. Conflict introduces variety big time. And it can actually further the relationship if it's faced and resolved. And this is a third area where if you don't do that tightrope, it could really tank the relationship. You could be on the precipice of having all that you want in a relationship, all your heart's desires, versus having to start all over again and repeat the cycle. But it doesn't have to become this whole big blow up. Struggling between the tendency to avoid conflicts just to keep the peace and the necessity of having honest, sometimes even difficult conversations for the health of the relationship can actually really help. And bringing up tough topics like things that you're disappointed about, expectations that were dashed, even hard feelings about things that have happened that were based on those misunderstandings. Bringing those up are definitely risky, but if you're not bringing them up, you're going to avoid conflict, but at the same time, it's just going to get pressed down further and further and further until eventually it will probably blow. And misunderstandings alongside poor communication are the root of so many conflicts. So of these three, I would say in the end, conflict resolution, communication, effective explanations of things, talking through and hashing out misunderstandings. This is really hard to do, but it will actually further the relationship. So what do you think? Is vulnerability powerful or is it just a power struggle? Where do you sit on that?